Millions of children are educated every day in a myriad of settings. Homeschool, public school, private school, charter schools, online academies, learning pods, private tutoring, and more. Why are so many families transitioning to homeschooling? What advantages have they found? What unique challenges do they face? What have they learned, and how can listening to their experiences support your child's education? These are their stories. Together, we learn. This is the Edvantage. Hello, fellow educators, and thank you for listening. I'm Todd Michael, creator and host of The Edvantage. Today's guest is Michael Perrone. Michael was born and raised in Houston, Texas, and now lives near Seattle, Washington. He has a bachelor's degree from the University of Texas and an MBA from BYU. Michael describes his professional life as doing a 10-year sentence behind corporate bars, consulting for companies like Amazon, Hitachi, GE, and Microsoft, before he walked away to become a better father, husband, and man. He is now a self-employed life coach to fathers who want to quit the corporate life and live life on their own terms, fulfilling their own goals. Michael and his wife of 13 years have 5 children, who they now homeschool as they run a co-op of about 50 kids. This co-op, which Michael started, and the simple ways you can join, support, or even start a co-op of your own, was the primary focus of our conversation. We also talked fatherhood and how homeschooling is an ideal fit for those who want to be involved, proactive fathers. All right, Michael, welcome to The Edvantage.
Hey, Todd. How you doing?
It's so good to have you here, and I've been looking forward to this for a while, and one of the reasons is because I know that you have so much to share, specifically about starting a homeschool co-op, and I know that's something that comes up quite a bit, actually. You know, people will express that concern of like, well, there's not a co-op in my area, or I don't know how to find one, or, you know, the one that exists is kind of small. And so we're going to definitely dig into that. But before we get to that, I'd like to hear a little bit about your own education, and what that was like, your schooling growing up, your experiences, highlights, maybe some of the challenges, and just kind of a summary of what that experience was like for you.
Sure. I can't say my personal education was all that unique. I did public school in the Houston and Austin, Texas areas. Normal high school experience. Did some clubs, did some sports, did some, AP classes. Maybe that's not totally normal. I don't know. But I would say overall, it was a good experience. My public school experience, I had good friends, had good memories. It wasn't until after I got out of public school that I sort of looked back and started to reevaluate, what could have been different? What could I do for my family? And then, of course, when you have kids of your own, a lot of those questions just start flooding your mind, right?
Sure.
But overall, like I said, I don't have a lot to complain about. Middle school, I think, is awkward and weird for everyone. I don't think I'm alone in that regard. But other than that, good teachers, bad teachers, kind of the norm.
Yeah. So from there, you mentioned like at the time it seemed pretty normal. Did you know many homeschoolers, or did you have much interaction with homeschooling in general during that time?
This is the 90s, so I knew a couple of homeschoolers through my church, and they had that reputation of being kind of weird, right?
Sure.
They didn't do all the same things that the public school kids do, and they were a little bit different than everyone else. And so that was my exposure to homeschooling, is for the most part just kind of a good family, but a little bit weird family.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is funny, right? Because as a parent looking at that, that's almost a plus or a bonus or benefit of homeschooling.
Yeah.
But as a kid, like that stands out. And I remember, because I was that weird homeschool kid, I remember a lot of my friends that like that was the first thing I want to know. Like, well, do you get to play do you do this? Do you do that? And it was clear that like the social currency was mostly what mattered to
Yeah.
my peers. Whereas the parents, they're like, oh, good, they don't have all those distractions. They can focus on, what matters or on their academics. So it's interesting how our opinion of that changes. So now for you, you went from, being in the public school system, being fine with it. It sounds like you weren't,
Yeah.
having a huge issue. What was the transition like then to deciding to homeschool your own children?
Yeah, I would say that, when my oldest was born, I did not have a thought of homeschooling, and my wife didn't either. But by the time he got to be 4 or 5 years old, right on the cusp of kindergarten, just like I said, all these questions started flooding our minds. Like,
Mm-hmm.
why send our kids to school? Just cause? Can we do it better?
Right.
And my wife is a teacher by trade. Before we had kids, she taught at public schools, and so was her sister and her mom and my brother. So we have a lot of teachers in the family. Yeah. And so we're very familiar with what's going on in public schools. We're very familiar with the challenges
Sure.
that have changed since we were kids. And so all those factors kind of came together, and we realized that one, we could probably do it better. There are some really, really good schools and some really good teachers, but it's impossible for those teachers and those schools to give more one-on-one time to my kids than I can.
Right.
Right. The other factor is, I guess, from a values standpoint, I I realized that someone is going to indoctrinate my kids, so it might as well be me. Right.
Right.
I was going to send my kids off to be indoctrinated for 8 hours a day, and then I would have just a small window to undo that damage,
Mm-hmm.
or to at least add to it. Right. If it was neutral experience, I at least add to it.
Right.
Um, why do that? Why don't I just be the one that indoctrinates them? Why don't I be the one that teaches them? And my wife. And then when we talk about the co-op, other trusted adults. Uh, and skip out on the middleman, skip out on the deprogramming, skip out on all of the pushback that they would get at such a young age.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of going back to what you said earlier about, reevaluating, or what I said earlier about evaluating my public school experience. I think getting a lot of opposition to my beliefs and my values in public school was both a positive and a negative. It kind of, helped me be stronger in certain ways, but also it helped me be a little bit insecure. And I feel like a lot of the times the weirdness or awkwardness that we see with homeschool families is that they're not as insecure and not as defensive about things that public school kids are.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll throw myself into that bucket as well, right? It's almost as if when we say a homeschool family is weird, it's almost as if we're saying, don't they know to be quieter about that? Don't they know not to show as much interest in whatever thing? That's not socially acceptable.
Yeah.
And like you said, as you get older and as you have kids of your own, you reevaluate whether or not that's a pro or a con.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost like the level of unapologetic acceptance of their own lifestyle and comfort in their own skin is so in such a sharp contrast to that perpetual insecurity that so many others feel, that's what makes them stand out. It's not even that it's weird, it's just that it's different, and it's you put it so well. Absolutely, it's that comfort and confidence in, we're good with it, this is what we're doing, we don't really care if anyone else has a problem with it. And that flies in the face of what so many people base their decisions off of, right? Well, what are my friends doing? What are my friends' friends doing? What are my neighbors doing? I don't want my kid to stand out or be different. I don't want them to fall behind. What is everyone else doing? What did my cousin do? And that's like the beginning of the consideration. That's not an afterthought. That is the thought. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So when you talk about kind of this teacher influence, or you have a lot of teachers and a lot of that mindset, was there any point where any of them, your wife included, kind of had opposition or thought, well, that's not really the traditional route, why would you do that? Or did everybody understand the context to the point where the teachers in your family were like, yeah, we get it, go for it, homeschool?
Yeah, I would say, starting with my wife, there was definitely a lot of discussions. She wasn't necessarily opposed to it, but
Sure.
once I believe I was the first one to bring it up. Once we started doing that, we had to work through her hangups, my hangups on it. What were our concerns about homeschooling? What would they be missing out on?
Right.
And as we started, going through that, we realized that there was just so much more to gain than there was to lose by homeschooling. But
Right.
we haven't gotten any resistance or really any negative feedback from others in family as well. We have other family members and cousins and others that do homeschool as well.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
it was actually good to have a resource to rely on and talk to and share ideas with.
Right. And it's interesting because yeah, a lot of times the people that I expect to be the harshest critics are the ones who get it the most, and it's those who are associating with with public school system. In fact, I just got a text from a friend today who is very dedicated to her job. I mean, she is really involved in the school district that I previously worked in, and I
Mm-hmm.
admire her dedication. And yet she was like, "Oh man, I love what you're doing. I'm so glad you're doing that. It's such an awesome thing." So I think it's not so much it's not as sharp of a contrast of as a us versus them situation anymore, or at least the perception that it used to be is kind of demystified now. And I think a lot of adults, no matter what their current role is, recognize the value in those options, like in being able to adjust to meet the needs of kids. And where the public school system isn't going to offer as quality of an education, most educators recognize that and they're like, yeah, if you can pull off homeschool, great. And
Yep.
likewise, I've had so many conversations with homeschool families who are like, yeah, we actually did public school for a while, or there's a period of time where I needed to put my kids back in school and I did, and it was fine, it was great. Or even many who are like, we actually enjoyed public school, we our kids enjoyed public school, we simply pivoted because we could add these benefits. So we're not anti public school, we're pro homeschool. So it's cool to kind of see these stories come out, because I think the baseline assumption is that you're either for this or for this, and you can possibly see value in all of the above, right? Like you couldn't see the nuance of it, but it is
Yeah.
not black and white. It's not just one or the other. It's really, hey, let's put energy into all these options and find out what's right for each kid.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. In my experience, my relatives who are teachers are just doing a job. They're not on a crusade to convince me, what I have to do or what I'm doing is wrong or anything like that.
Right. So at what point, because you've got a lot of kids, you've been doing this for a while. At what point did you decide, okay, homeschooling's cool, but now I'm going to add a whole bunch of extra work to my life and try to start a co-op?
Yeah, well, so it came about pretty naturally. We have a neighbor who homeschools as well, goes to our church, and then I have a brother who lives next door, and they quasi homeschool, and so it just made sense since all the kids were friends to do certain classes together,
Sure.
and then occasionally we invite other people. Another family got involved full time, essentially, and then another, and then we decided, well, let's actually organize a real co-op. And last year we had 19 families in our co-op,
Wow.
and it was pretty overwhelming. But I see it as a huge pro because you get reinforcement from other adults, other like-minded adults, and you also get to have certain activities that and classes and opportunities that'd be really hard to do your own family, and you can find talent in other families to help facilitate those kinds of things.
Right. And so what I love that you explain it as that you make it sound so simple and so easy. Like it just happened. It's so natural. But I
Yeah.
think, looking at it from, and even from my own perspective, but for a lot of us, it's, well, how much extra work is it going to be? I'm already busy with my own kids. Is this just going to add on a ton of extra time and attention and effort, especially if you're the one starting it? Because then there's kind of this ownership of, well, I want to make sure it's successful if I'm the one going to kind of rally people together and launch it. So from a practical perspective, I mean, it sounds like you found a pretty natural flow and it happened organically, but what would you say the time commitment, the energy, how do you divide the labor or the responsibility? What are some of the mechanics of it look like in practice?
Yeah, so I don't mean to make it sound super easy. I think it started easily enough, but once we got to that big group of about nineteen families, it became overwhelming.
Mm-hmm.
And especially because the co-op was in my house and my neighbor's house. And so, I come down from work and there's a group of, 8 middle school kids in my dining room learning how to, do art or sing or whatever. Right.
Right.
So it's a little overwhelming, but I would say from a practical perspective, something we learned is we should have just continued that simple, keep it easy, keep it loose, keep it simple approach to building a co-op. You're not building a school. At least that's what most co-ops aren't. They're not schools.
Mm-hmm.
So there doesn't need to be a lot of structure. There doesn't need to be a lot of rules or policies. What there needs to be is trust. And if you have trust, doesn't matter, I feel like, how big your co-op is or isn't, the amount of work and the amount of time to keep it going will be less. So there are positions in the co-op. There's a board of about 5 people. I'm on the board. In fact, I'm the director of the co-op this year and starting last year. And really, that's my MO is I just want to keep it simple. Anytime we're tempted to build in some sort of structure, I just want to squash it, right?
Yeah.
Because for a couple of reasons, and stop me if I'm rambling here, but a couple of reasons would be when the homeschooling families are independent people, they don't want to be told what to do. They're already homeschooling. They want to have their own program. And if you start telling them what they need to do and how they need to do it, you're just going to cause problems and alienate people. And so for me, it's, hey, there's a very simple set of rules, a very simple program. We're here to facilitate classes across families. And that's kind of it.
Yeah. And I imagine by having that simple mindset, you're attracting families with that similar desire to keep things simple, right? So, because, my mind goes to, well, there are families who love the structure and who would probably want to interject like 18 different policies and all this extra stuff. But I think that's the cool thing about if you're the one who starts it, you can keep it with the vibe that you want. Just like if you're looking to join a co-op, you would join one that fit well with your values or your standards or your time commitment. And if there are families who really want it to be overly structured or very rigid, or even have like schedules and paid instructors and things where, there are ones out there that are very, it almost is like borders on charter school, right? Then they can do that, but they all are not going to have to look the same. And that, I think, is the key point there, right?
Yes, it is. You need to find people who are going to operate the same way you are. Yeah. Of course, I am biased towards that. I guess I have no interest in like running a school and being a principal and looking at report cards and looking at budgets. So that would be too much for me to do.
Yeah, I can speak from my.
What's much more fun, for example, this upcoming semester. What's that?
I was gonna say I can speak from my experience as an assistant principal. It's not fun. You don't want to do it. Your instincts are correct.
No. Yeah.
But go on. What were you saying?
I'd rather spend all my time either hanging out with the other adults in the co-op. For example, we had a dad night at my house a few months ago where we all did feats of strength at the house, all the dads. And that was just a blast. Or teaching the kids and just being a part of their education in that way. And anything beyond that to me is, and everyone's mileage may vary on this, but for me, it's the opposite of why we got into homeschooling.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good awareness to have, I think, to realize if you are going to join a co-op, if you're going to start a co-op, if you're going to co-sponsor one, whatever, what have you, it's good to have that awareness of now what was the value of homeschooling to you in the first place, and is the co-op enhancing that value, or is it layering back in something that you didn't want in the first place? Because it's so easy as a parent to kind of overstretch ourselves and say like, well, it's for my kids, so I'm willing to do it. When you highlight so well,
Yeah.
you can still give the co-op, you can still offer the good without the negative stressors. And again, this is for those who value that, like you and me, who value keeping it simple. For those who want the structure, then likewise, like maybe it would be really frustrating for them to join a co-op with people that were more relaxed and laid back, and that would be a stress for them because they can't predict or they don't have things scheduled out for the whole year or whatever. So having that awareness is really key, I think, and being honest with yourself about why you would want to join in the first place. Like, what are you looking to get out of a co-op? And then
Yeah.
evaluating what the co-op, either that you start or that you join, actually has to offer. Are those needs going to match
Yeah.
up, or are you going to create just a whole nother animal to kind of have to navigate, and it doesn't help you, or especially doesn't help your kids in the long run?
Yeah, exactly. Good summary of that.
So I'm curious now, with now that you've been doing it for a while, is there anything that uh, potential pitfalls or warnings that you would give for somebody who hears this and is like, oh man, I want to start a co-op, I'm all in, I want to do it? Anything like from a legal sense, or from kind of you mentioned trust being so important, or do you have tips of how to navigate that, like maybe keeping people that wouldn't work so well out? I mean, I feel like there's a lot of layers here, a lot of moving parts.
Yeah. Yeah, I would say on the legal front, it probably depends upon the state,
Sure.
what's required legally for a co-op to exist. In the state of Washington, not a lot is required, and so that helps us to be loose.
Sure.
Um, and yeah, so that I don't know how that works in other states, and if there are charters or incorporations or something that has to happen on a legal
Sure.
basis to keep it going. On the trust front, I would say that, yeah, you kind of have to pick and choose, especially at the beginning when you're establishing what your co-op's nature and culture and the whole how it's going to operate. You need to have people that are, if you're starting it, who think just like you, and maybe just bring something else to the table, right? A different set of skills, different focus in classes perhaps, but I think it will kill any group. Especially, I feel like we have a challenge, right? As people who want to sort of step out of the mainstream. Like I said, we're all independent. We're all have our own ideas how things should be done, and so it's really hard to organize a group like that.
Right.
So everything you can to make it similar at the beginning is going to be able to or enable you to build the co-op and make it last.
Mm-hmm.
That answers the question.
Yeah, that's like that initial momentum is really where the power is, because if you're aligned, then you keep that momentum while adding people, rather than every time you add somebody, it's a whole different dynamic and you have to restructure and recalibrate, and everyone's adjusting, constantly reevaluating what they're doing. You're saying it's like you get it established with the few, you can keep things under wraps, and then you move forward together.
Yeah, exactly.
That makes sense. And I'm curious now, as you've been homeschooling for a while now, how many years has it been? I can't remember. Your oldest is...
Our oldest is 11, so
Okay.
He's entering into 5th. I think this is our 6th year homeschooling.
Yeah. So how has that experience been for your family? I mean, I'm sure it helps to have a teacher in the mix, but
Yeah.
You're both involved, and I'm curious, what have been some of the highlights, some of the benefits, that maybe unexpected benefits or things that you've discovered along the way, and then also, what are some of the challenges that you've faced and had to work through?
Yeah, I would say, first to say and give credit to my wife. She does most of the homeschooling. There have been years where I have nearly split it or done, certain aspects of their homeschooling. And last year in the co-op, I taught our kids classes and such, but it's typically, her putting in most of the effort to teach and to hold our kids accountable as they progress. And then I support, or I come in and I teach certain elements or certain classes. And we've had to learn, this is where my wife's educational background and neither one of us having much of a background homeschooling is a little bit of a detriment in that when we first started, I think we felt like we needed that structure. We needed to make sure that, our oldest was, getting graded and that there's this outside evaluation of his skills and that he's keeping pace with, with the curriculum. Right.
Right.
And so part of our own journey is realizing that, no, our kids need to learn and our kids need to progress. And that's why we're homeschooling, but we don't have to, as the old saying goes, we don't have to, pull up the plant to check on the weeds every day, right? Or not the weeds, the roots every day. We can just let them be and let them grow and let them bear fruit in their own time.
Mm-hmm. It's that distinction between homeschool and school at home, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So we started out more school at home. We've become more homeschool and as my wife says now, fun school. So.
Do your kids buy into that or do they roll their eyes?
Sometimes it depends. If it's reading for a couple of them, then they don't buy that.
Yeah.
If it's math for another one of them, they don't buy that. But
right.
Overall, they know that, for example, we're typically done on a non-co-op day. We're done with school by 11:30, before lunch, essentially. And they know they have, friends in public school. And so you're in public school, you'd have another 3 hours of school.
Sure.
So
yeah.
They like, oh.
I was just, was that today? I think it was today. Maybe it was yesterday, but I was up with my son and there were all the kids lined up on the corner waiting for the bus. And I was like, hey, come over, look out the window. And I was like, what? I'm like, you would have had to already have eaten breakfast, gotten all your stuff together, and be out standing on the corner right now. And I wouldn't see you again until late this afternoon. What do you think about that? And he's just staring. I was like, exactly. Sometimes it's nice to remind them of some of the benefits. So I always say, I think that homeschooling is really an extension of parenting. It's one of the most pure, you really distill down education into its purest, most natural form, which is parenting. I mean, every aspect of parenting is passing something on to our kids, whether it's teach them about the larger culture in which you live or your family, household culture, your family history, the customs, the norms, the societal, traditions that you have. All of these things are what we do with our kids is educating them. And it's not always this formal education, but it's educating them. And so I'm curious for you, how has homeschooling influenced your role as a father? What impact has it had on how you father your children, and how have those two kind of informed each other?
I would say it has raised the bar for me. At least I feel like it has, and I feel like it's something I'm continually trying to meet. Right? Haven't done it yet. I would say that, if and like I said, this may not be the way everyone looks at it or the way that everyone feels about, sending their kids to public school. But for me, if I send my kids off, if I don't homeschool, then I'm essentially consuming their education, right? I'm not producing it. I'm not building anything. I'm just a passive participant or passive non-participant in their education and their development. And because they're here all day and because I work from home most of the time, they see me and they see my example and they see how I spend my time and what I do and how I react to them being kids, right? My oldest is 11, my youngest is 8 months. So there's a lot of chaos in my house, right? And because they're here and because we're producing our family together, our family culture and our family's education together, it means that more is expected of me. I can't I can't just send them off and come back and how'd it go? Great, and move on with the day, right? I have to be an active participant.
And that, I think, really distills down the benefit, and like how you say, it ups the ante. It puts that pressure because, yeah, I've noticed the same thing of, like, the more you are involved with your kids, it's great, and there's a lot more opportunities to influence them. But it causes a lot more of that self reflection of, well, what am I influencing them to be? They're going to become much more like me than had they not been around me. I better also spend some time working on myself and becoming a man that should be aspirational for them, a father that is aspirational for them, rather than
Yep.
just the default version of whoever I kind of naturally would be if I just lazily and mindlessly went through life. And so you put that well. I'm curious if you have some words of wisdom or what advice you would have for um, the dads out there who maybe aren't as involved, whether it be, I think a lot of us, and I know I was this way when I was working outside the home. I had kind of the day job, and you've been there, like you've had that time where your work kind of was the only focus that you ever had time to fill your day with. And I think a lot of us have used that as an excuse to then ignore some of those other responsibilities. So rather than being done with work, coming home and looking for those teachable moments, those times to connect with our kids, it becomes a focus inward. Well, how can I relax? How can I unwind? How can I prepare for the next grind, for the next
Yep.
day, et cetera, et cetera? Whether or not you work from home, whether or not you own your own business, whether or not you have a day job, 9 to 5, all that aside, what principles would you highlight, or what advice would you have for the dad who recognizes he could be a little more involved, or who wants to be more involved with his kids?
I would say what has helped me, and that's a big question, and I'm not
It
entirely
is.
sure I can answer it
Answer it
fully, but
completely and cohesively.
yeah,
Go. We
here's my
got two
thesis.
hours.
Yeah. But for me, what has been impactful is realizing that my kids are young for only so long. And, my oldest, like I said, is 11 years old. Uh, and pretty soon he's going to be a teenager. And not long after that, he's going to be an adult and out of the house. And I only have a few years with each child where they're essentially old enough to be taught and young enough to be receptive and and moldable, I guess, in that regard.
Sure.
And then they move on, right? And then that's my time. And I don't, when they're adults, my ability to influence them will be less, right? And we have our entire lives to work, and we have our entire lives to do careers or own businesses or whatever else. And so, to me, it's helped me to focus in and say, you know what, it's okay if I don't um, if I don't put as much energy into a job or a career for this period of time, because this period of time is never coming back.
Hmm.
And so, like I said, it helps me focus. Does that answer your question? That's what came to mind
It
for me.
does, absolutely. And I like how simple you keep it. It's remembering that value that you have to offer to them during that limited time versus trying to do all the things all at once, and then
Yeah,
thinking you can circle back around and go play catch with your kid later, and you realize, oh wait, they're in college now, I guess I missed that opportunity, or whatever it is. All too often I think we get caught up in uh, you know what the world values as the big accomplishments, like how much money you're making, what status do you have in your career, what education do you have, what type of toys do you own, quote unquote toys do you
yeah,
own, and how do you show them off, who do you know, who are your connections, how well connected are you, and so on. And a lot of that stuff is important, and it does matter, and it's not to say that you just can ignore all of that and go become go hibernate in the woods or something. But if you
Become a monk
recognize,
and yeah.
right, if you recognize like, yes, this is the paradigm that I have to operate in, this is the world that I'm in, those things do require some of my time. However, the first and foremost highest value role that I have is as a father, is as a
Yeah.
husband, is as the person who is responsible for these small people before they go out into the world and start leading their own lives. It really is a huge shift from where society places value, and you can kind of clear away a lot of those distractions. You start with what matters most, and then you can add those things in as needed. But it's a totally different mindset. I know for me, like, so many of the moments that I value most and that I cherish, the memories that I cherish, were the unplanned small moments with my kids that popped up. It wasn't the great grand adventure that I created. It was, spontaneously we decided to go fishing, or my kids asked me to, wrestle with them, and before I knew it, all of them were involved in dogpiling on me, or they wanted to do a dance party, and then I decided that I was going to spin them around, and all of them wanted a turn, and we started making it more and more elaborate, like dumb little moments. But it's that connection, it's that bonding, it's that interaction, and when you place that as your highest value, everything else starts to fade in comparison. So
Yeah.
I think you're spot on. You absolutely are. Is there any other wisdom, experiences, stories, anything else you would like to share about either your homeschooling in general, or running the co-op, things that relate to that?
I would say my philosophy, my approach, or our family's approach to the whole thing has just been, approaching it with of an opportunity and abundance mindset, seeing that our children's education does not have to check a certain number of boxes. It doesn't have to, meet with standardized testing, or best practice educator policies, which I think, as you know, they change all the time,
Right.
right? Some new program, a new thing, right? That our children's education and our home life is really, it's completely up to us. The sky's the limit, and we can really focus on certain aspects of education that are really important to us. We can spend time. A few years ago, we did a 3-month unit on salmon because our kids just loved it. And we just kept talking about salmon. We went to a salmon hatchery, and it just, uh, there's no end to the possibilities and the opportunity when you do homeschooling. And I find when I look at it that way, when my wife looks at it that way, when our kids look at it that way, a lot of that stress, a lot of that anxiety and unsureness about, or uncertainty about, uh, how do I do homeschool? Am I good enough to teach my kids? What am I depriving them of? A lot of that just fades away.
Well said. Well, thank you so much for all the wisdom you've shared today. Thank you for coming on the show and giving of your time. Especially thank you for being a guinea pig of sorts to test out this approach to a simplified start to a co-op. And I hope that I know I've taken a lot from that, but I hope that those listening realize it really can be that simple. It really can be something that's natural and organic. It can start with just a few families, and if it needs to grow from there, great. But even if it doesn't grow that much from there, just those interactions, that extra level of support and interaction, can have so much value. So thank you for showing us that way, and for being a forward-thinking educator and father. It's been a pleasure talking with you.
Yeah, it's been great to be on top. Thanks.
That was Michael Perrone, husband, homeschool dad, recovering corporate consultant, life coach, and creator of the kind of co-op he wanted for his family. If you like what you heard today, please take a moment to give our podcast a positive rating and review, and be sure to share it with the other parents and educators in your life. If you want to take the guesswork out of homeschooling while saving yourself time and money, head over to homeschooladvantage.com and check out our free resources, and consider becoming a member to unlock your access to the most comprehensive training available for homeschool parents. Their education begins with you. You can join the conversation by connecting with me on Twitter and Instagram at Todd K. Michael, Facebook and YouTube, Homeschool Edvantage, and at homesschooladvantage.com. That's homesschooladvantage with an E.com. Links to all in the show notes. Thank you for joining us. Bye, everybody.
And if it wasn't for all of you, if it wasn't for all of you,